This diagram represents the engine of the ancient world, the law of retribution. It is a transactional equation where righteousness guarantees a blessing, and suffering is the inevitable penalty for sin. The Book of Job functions as a rigorous intellectual deconstruction of this theology. It moves past the idea of a simple moral fable to examine why the math of fairness so often fails. The earthly stage begins with a man who should be the ultimate proof of the system. Job is wealthy, pious, and righteous, a living testament to the rewards of a well-lived life. God himself provides the testimony that Job is blameless. This makes the suffering that follows a deliberate theological contradiction, designed to break the internal logic of the retribution model. In a single day, Job loses his livestock, his servants, and all 10 of his children. He is left destitute on a dung heap, scraping his skin with broken pottery, a total collapse from the greatest man to a social pariah. While Job sits in the ashes, the narrative reveals a simultaneous heavenly stage. Unseen by any human observer, a divine council meeting has determined the terms of Job's life. There is a stark, sharp disconnect between God's proud assessment of Job in heaven and Job's horrific reality on earth. Job is the subject of divine bragging, even as he experiences what looks like divine abandonment. Job's innocence proves that the universe does not operate on a strict principle of transactional justice. His story forces us to abandon the demand for a fair universe and look for a logic rooted in a much deeper divine wisdom. This dialogue in the heavenly council sets the precondition for everything that happens on earth. The adversary, the Satan, appears here as the ultimate cynic. He argues that disinterested piety is a human impossibility, that we only love God because God pays us to. He points to the hedge of protection surrounding Job as evidence of a bribe. In his view, Job's righteousness is hollow, bought and paid for by prosperity. God's response is to remove that hedge. Allowing Job to suffer is a necessary stress test of the cynic's premise. This echoes the broader biblical theme that human faithfulness in the dark demonstrates God's wisdom to the principalities and powers watching from the heavenly places. Because the heavenly dialogue confirms this suffering occurs without any reason, it is impossible to view Job's pain as a punishment. Back on earth, Job's friends arrive to find him in the ruins. They are immediately confronted with the failure of their worldview. Desperate to protect the retribution model, they accuse Job of hidden sins. They prefer a universe that makes sense over a friend who is telling the truth. In the center of this tension stands Job's wife. She is a nameless figure with a single line of dialogue that has fueled centuries of theological debate. When she speaks to Job in chapter 2, she uses a word with a sharp linguistic edge, barak. Barak translates to both bless and curse. This dual meaning mirrors the cognitive dissonance of trauma, where lines between devotion and despair blur. The Greek Septuagint attempted to resolve this ambiguity by adding 12 lines of sympathetic lament, portraying her as a wife simply trying to end her husband's misery. Conversely, Pope Gregory the Great categorized her as the new Eve, the devil's helper sent to entice Job into a final, fatal blasphemy. This historical urge to label her as either a saint or a temptress reflects our own inability to hold the complex, messy emotions of raw grief. Job rejects the easy theological math of his friends and the temptation to abandon God. He models a sacred protest, an unresolved state of brutal honesty and stubborn trust. The divine silence finally breaks in chapter 38. God speaks to Job from the center of a whirlwind. God ignores Job's demands for a legal trial and refuses to explain the why of his suffering. Instead, he takes Job on a cosmic tour from the foundations of the earth to the storehouses of the snow. He demonstrates that human horizons are too narrow to judge the inner workings of the universe. God then highlights 2 creatures, Behemoth and Leviathan. These had specific meanings in the ancient Near East. Leviathan was the ultimate symbol of chaos, the raw, untamed power of the ocean that ancient sailors feared as a rival deity. God's description of Leviathan changes everything. The creature is dangerous, but it is not evil. It is a beloved part of the world, and it is not a result of human sin. This points to the tohu vavohu, the formless void. God carved a space for garden order out of chaos, but he did not entirely eradicate the wild, dangerous elements of creation. The universe is profoundly good, but it is not designed to be perfectly safe. Chaos and danger are features of a complex design, not failures of God's justice. The simplistic model of retributive justice, the idea that fairness rules the cosmos, lies in pieces. Pulling back reveals its context. The shattered scale is one microscopic gear inside a massive, brilliantly complex astrolabe, a network of wisdom humans cannot fully map. The world is not constructed to prevent righteous people from suffering. As finite humans, we lack the data necessary to evaluate the wisdom of that design. This explains God's rebuke of Job's friends. Their defense of transactional justice was an act of intellectual overreach that misrepresented the divine character. God validates Job because, despite his flawed accusations, he approached God honestly with his grief and demanded a genuine encounter. For those living in the space between ashes and hope, the book offers a difficult but necessary perspective. Authentic spiritual maturity is forged in the crucible where easy explanations for pain are absent. The resolution of Job replaces the demand for a neatly categorized answer with the reality of God's enduring presence within a complex, untamed world.